Looking back, I should have known something was off when Blake spent more time organizing our wedding binders than actually talking to me about our future. But here's the thing. I was 29 and tired of waiting for my life to actually start. Anyway, make sure to hit that like button if you enjoy hearing about absolute chaos, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new here. The morning of our wedding, I woke up in my childhood bedroom feeling like I was about to walk into a prison instead of paradise. 4 years with Blake had felt like 4 decades of spreadsheets, budget meetings, and him explaining why we couldn't afford anything fun because we needed to build our foundation. The man treated romance like a business transaction. Even his proposal was calculated. He'd researched ring prices for 3 months and presented me with a PowerPoint about our relationship ROI. My bridesmaids, Jessica and Allison, were buzzing around me, fixing my dress and gushing about how perfect everything looked. The venue was gorgeous, I'll give Blake that. This restored barn with fairy lights everywhere. Exactly what I dreamed of. Since I was little. But as I stared at myself in the mirror, all I could think about was Kai. Blake's younger brother had this energy that made every room feel electric when he walked in. While Blake was busy color-coding our wedding timeline, Kai would show up and suddenly everything felt possible. He'd grab my hand to spin me around the kitchen while Blake was calculating catering costs per person. He'd whisper jokes that made me laugh until my stomach hurt while Blake droned on about our 5-year financial plan. Between us, I'd been having feelings about Kai for months. Nothing physical happened. I'm not that kind of person, but the emotional connection was undeniable. When Kai looked at me, I felt seen in a way Blake never made me feel. Blake looked at me like I was another item on his life checklist: college degree, stable job, suitable wife house with good resale value. Walking down the aisle, I caught Kai's eye where he stood as best man. He looked incredible in his tuxedo, and when he smiled at me, my heart did this thing it had never done for Blake. My father handed me off to Blake, who immediately straightened my dress like he was adjusting a picture frame. Even at our own wedding, he couldn't just be present in the moment. The officiant started his whole speech about love and commitment, and I felt this panic rising in my chest. I kept looking at Blake's face, so serious, so focused on getting through the ceremony efficiently. This was the man I was supposed to spend forever with, this calculating, emotionless robot who planned our date nights 3 weeks in advance. When the officiant got to that dramatic part about speaking now or forever holding your peace, something inside me snapped. I couldn't do it. I couldn't pretend anymore that I was happy with someone who made me feel invisible. "I can't do this," I heard myself saying. My voice came out stronger than I expected. The entire barn went silent. 100 pairs of eyes suddenly focused on me. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Kai, whose face showed this mixture of surprise and something else. Hope, maybe. Them. I'm sorry. I continued, though I wasn't really sorry at all. I was finally being honest for the first time in months. "I love you, Blake, but I'm in love with someone else." The gasps from our families were immediate, but I barely heard them. I turned to face Kai directly, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. "I choose Kai." The silence that followed felt endless. I expected Blake to explode, to shout, to show some kind of real emotion for once in our relationship. Instead, he just stood there with this eerily calm expression, like he was processing data. Kai looked completely frozen, staring at his shoes like a coward. "Come on, I thought say something." "Fight for me. Show everyone that what we have is real." But Blake spoke first, and what he said chilled me to the bone. "Excellent choice, Heidi." His voice was steady, almost amused. "He's all yours." Then he turned to my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dennis, who were sitting in the front row looking like they'd been struck by lightning. My father's face was already turning that dangerous shade of red I remembered from my teenage years. Mr. Dennis." Blake continued, his voice carrying perfectly through the silent barn. "Since we're sharing truths today, I feel it's only fair you have all the information about your new prospective son-in-law." My stomach dropped. What was he talking about? Blake didn't raise his voice or get dramatic. He just spoke with this terrifying clarity that made every word hit like a hammer. "A few weeks ago, Kai came to me for a significant loan, and it made me concerned enough to look into his situation. You should know that he is currently managing over $38,000 in online gambling debts. He also has 2 pending legal issues, one for public intoxication and disorderly conduct, and another is a small claim suit from a former landlord for $4,200 in damages. I have all the documentation to back this up should you wish to see it. The explosion was immediate. My father's face went from red to purple, and my mother made this sound like she was dying. I started screaming, but not at Blake, at my father. It's not like that. He's going to change. Everyone deserves a second chance. But my father wasn't listening. He grabbed my arm so hard I knew there'd be bruises. His knuckles white with rage. "You have shamed us," he hissed. "You have shamed this family." He started physically dragging me down the aisle, and I was fighting him, trying to wrench my arm free. My beautiful white dress was getting dirty, dragging through the dirt and gravel outside the barn. I was wailing, begging him to listen, to understand that love was more important than money. Kai finally moved, running after us and shouting, "Sir, let her go, we can explain." But it was too late. The damage was done. I looked back once and saw Blake still standing at that altar, watching the whole thing unfold like he'd orchestrated every single moment. My parents dragged me to their car and drove me straight home, where they proceeded to scream at me for 3 straight hours. My mother kept crying about how humiliated she was in front of their church friends. My father kept asking how I could throw away someone like Blake, stable, successful, responsible, for a degenerate gambler. "You don't understand," I kept saying. "Kai makes me feel alive. Blake makes me feel like I'm suffocating." Feelings don't pay bills," my father snapped. "Feelings don't build a future. That boy is going to drag you down with him." But I didn't care. I was finally free from Blake's suffocating control, his endless planning, his treating me like a business partner instead of a woman. When Kai showed up that night, throwing pebbles at my window like we were teenagers, I snuck out and ran away with him. The first few weeks felt like a movie. We stayed in cheap motels, living off the little money I had in my checking account, and it felt romantic and rebellious. Kai would hold me all night and tell me how brave I was, how he'd never met anyone willing to sacrifice everything for love. But then reality started creeping in. Kai lost his job, not because of the wedding scandal like he claimed, but because he'd been getting aggressive with HR about payroll advances. The gambling debts weren't going anywhere, and the legal issues were getting worse. We were burning through my savings fast, and Kai kept talking about temporary setbacks while scrolling through sports betting apps on his phone. I tried to get my stuff back from Blake, thinking I could at least salvage some of my belongings, and maybe get back some of the money my parents had contributed to the wedding. I sent him an email with a list of everything I wanted: my personal items, half the furniture we'd bought together, the big screen TV, even the security deposit from our old apartment. His response was like a legal brief. He attached receipts for everything, bank statements showing his sole purchases and documentation, proving that our old security deposit had been forfeited because of damage my cat had caused. He ended with a line that made my skin crawl: "You are both no longer welcome on this property. Any attempt to enter the premises will be considered trespassing." I was furious. This was the Blake I'd been living with for 4 years. Cold, calculating, always having to win every argument with facts and paperwork. I fired back with emails calling him petty and vindictive, demanding he pay back my parents' $20,000 contribution to the wedding. That's when Blake made his masterpiece move. He wrote directly to my parents expressing his deepest sorrow for how things ended, and including a fully itemized budget of all wedding expenses. He showed exactly where their money had gone: the non-refundable deposits, the vendors who had been paid in full, the services that had been rendered despite my decision not to accept them. My parents' response was swift and brutal. They cut me off completely. No money, no support, no contact. My father told people at church that he had no daughter. My mother blocked my number. Suddenly, Kai and I were stuck in a motel room with no income and mounting debts. The romance wore off pretty quickly when we were arguing about whether we could afford McDonald's for dinner. Kai started getting mean, blaming me for ruining everything by not handling my parents better. He'd disappear for hours, claiming he was looking for work, but coming back smelling like alcohol. When things got really desperate, we went to Blake's parents for help. I thought surely they'd have sympathy for us, especially Blake's mother, who'd always been sweet to me. But Blake's father threw us out before we could even finish explaining our situation. That's when I played my last card. I called Blake's mother and told her I was pregnant. It was a lie, but I was desperate. I thought if she believed she was going to have a grandchild, she'd convince Blake to help us, or at least give us some money to get back on our feet. For a moment, it seemed to work. Blake's mother was crying with joy, talking about how a baby changes everything. But Blake was still 10 steps ahead of me. A few days later, my own mother called me, and she was absolutely hysterical. Blake had contacted her and told her about my fertility issues, how I'd been going to a specialist because we'd been having trouble conceiving. He mentioned specific dates, doctors' names, everything. A surprise pregnancy wasn't just unlikely, it was medically improbable. The call between my mother and me was the worst conversation of my life. She was screaming about how I'd tried to manipulate her deepest desire for grandchildren, how I'd lied about something so sacred. When she hung up on me, I knew that was it. I'd burned the last bridge. My father sent me one final text. We have one daughter. She is a missionary in Africa. They'd literally erased me from their lives. Without family support, everything fell apart fast. Kai tried to sue Blake for emotional distress, claiming the wedding revelation had ruined his life. The case got thrown out in the first hearing, and Kai was stuck with legal fees he couldn't pay. He started drinking more, disappearing for days, and when he was around, he was bitter and cruel. I ended up taking a job at a chain restaurant off the highway, serving coffee and burgers to truckers and travelers. It was humiliating. Me with my college degree, wearing a polyester uniform and asking if people wanted fries with that. Kai would sit at home playing video games and betting on sports with money we didn't have. 8 months after the wedding, I was working a double shift when Blake walked into my restaurant. He looked exactly the same. Clean, put together, successful. He ordered coffee and a sandwich like it was the most natural thing in the world. When I brought his order over, he looked up at me with those calculating eyes and said, "My life is quiet now, Heidi, and I'm very happy with the quiet." That was it. No anger, no gloating, just complete indifference. He left a normal tip and walked out, and I realized that to him, I was already forgotten. A year later, I'm still with Kai, but it's not love anymore. It's just inertia. We're stuck together by shared debt and mutual resentment. He blames me for destroying his relationship with his family. I blame him for not being worth the sacrifice I made. I heard through mutual friends that Blake sold our house and moved somewhere new. He's dating someone, a nurse or something equally respectable. They look happy in the photos that occasionally surface on social media. Look, I know what people think, that I was selfish, that I destroyed my own life, that I got what I deserved. But here's what they don't understand. I was suffocating with Blake. He was slowly killing my spirit with his spreadsheets and his plans and his complete inability to be spontaneous. The truth is, I don't regret choosing love over security. I regret that Kai wasn't the man I thought he was. I regret that my parents were too rigid to understand that the heart wants what it wants. I regret that Blake was vindictive enough to weaponize information against his own brother. But I don't regret being honest about my feelings, even if it destroyed everything. At least I know what it feels like to choose passion over practicality, even if it didn't work out the way I hoped. Blake got his revenge by letting me live with the consequences of my own choices. And maybe that's the cruelest revenge of all, not fighting for someone who was never worth fighting for in the first place.